truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Monday, July 22nd, 2024, the 1279th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack or a wide variety of podcast platforms. And of course, Rumble, all I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. Okay, on Wednesday, when last we spoke, if you are a paid subscriber, we were still discussing the assassination event, the selection of J.D. Vance as the running mate for Donald Trump in the reality television series about this year's fake election. And we were talking about a largely uneventful Republican National Convention. that featured everyone from slutwalk Satanist Amber Rose to former WWE star Hulk Hogan, the wrestler whose job was literally kayfabe. His job was to pretend to be angry at people and then pretend to fight those people in a fight that is itself simulated. And despite all the participants, the people involved in the production and display of these simulated fight sequences and the simulated interpersonal drama that would lead to the simulated fight sequences, and the people watching all of this at home through their televisions, knowing that it was all fake, it was all scripted, it was all acted out, it was all simulated, everyone simply agreed to also pretend that it's all real. They didn't even go so far as to reach that point where they might suspend disbelief. It wasn't even necessary because they were all just happy to agree that if they all collectively pretended it was real, it would feel real enough. Now, Hulk Hogan was a big wrestler when I was a kid, like 40 years ago. And he wasn't the first one of them, and it's still going on today, and everyone is still doing that same thing today, knowing that it's fake, but pretending that it's real so that it's more enjoyable. That's basically what we do in our politics, except people believe it's actually really important that everyone pretends it's all real, because if people stop pretending, then everybody's got to wonder, hey, who's running this whole thing? And what is it that they're all intending to do to us? And that's the point at which a lot of people go back to saying things like, J.D. Vance is really going to help Donald Trump secure the working class white vote in swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And people believe that this is astute political analysis. You see, J.D. Vance, according to his autobiography that was then turned into a major Hollywood film by Ron Howard, Hillbilly Elegy is what I'm referring to. According to that, J.D. Vance was a poor kid from a white working class family in that part of the country, which means there's nothing that white working class people in that part of the country would rather do than vote for J.D. Vance. They weren't going to do it just for Donald Trump, even though they are the absolute most diehard part of Trump's base. They're doing it because they're impressed with J.D. Vance. And so people offer up this sort of political analysis, and everybody's like, yeah, I've heard all those things said before. That sounds right. That makes sense. J.D. Vance, Trump selected him to lock down the white working class in these swing states. But here's the thing. They're not swing states, and elections are fake. And Trump doesn't need to lock down the white working class. He's got them all. And he had them all in 2020, and he had them all in 2016. And not only that, that's not where the voters are in those states, or so we're told. In Wisconsin, they're all in Milwaukee. In Michigan, they're all in Detroit. And in Pennsylvania, they're all in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And we are told that all of those places are just filled with urban blacks, which the Democrats win. And that's what makes it impossible for Republicans to win those states now. You see, they're swing states, but Democrats have the edge. And then J.D. Vance comes in and locks down the white working class again. And that's really what pushes those swing states over the edge. Except they're not swing states. The whole thing's preposterous. And everyone would just immediately see that. But if they saw that, then they would have to think about things like, hey, why did Trump select J.D. Vance as his running mate in this fake campaign leading to a fake election that might not even happen? And then you have to hop the fence and leave Normieville. And a lot of people don't want to do that because it opens a whole range of questions that people don't want to think about. It's easier when everything's normal, and as they knew it before, they would rather pretend that all of the fakery can be explained away by strange and random occurrences among very real events in this strange period of life. And if you're going to focus on all those small details that show all these things to be fake, well, you're really wasting your time. You're missing what's important in life, you see. So it's better to just memorize as much of the official story as you can and then express your opinions about it to other people, agreeing that the official story is ultimately true. And we're all going to simply have different opinions, so we shrug and we move on to talking about what else we saw on television and what we intend to eat. Now, I think over the last few years, people have begun to lose their appetite for all of this fakery and nonsense. There certainly are public affairs. Those are a part of our world. We have these governments at the local level. We have various boards and committees that decide the details of how we are to go about living our lives, whether it's a homeowners association or a school board or a city council or a county administrator or your state elected officials, all the way up to the federal level and eventually all the way up to president. There are people making the rules and setting the laws. And if we violate those laws and we're caught, there are people who will prosecute us. And there are judges who will weigh the claims against us and the claims on our behalf. And they'll decide whether we should be punished and how we will be punished. And then other people will punish us. All that stuff is real. So there must be a process by which all that stuff happens. And that process has to be real, and that's the political process we participate in. And all of these stories are about that process. So on some level, the stories have to be real because the stories influence this process. And it becomes easy to convince ourselves that because some of it must be real, that all of it probably is real. And that's where we drive ourselves into a ditch. And I'm going to exaggerate the case a little bit here to make the point, but if each and every politician is installed, regardless of what people that politician is meant to represent actually think about that politician, they can just be installed through an election whose results are fake as reported, not substantiated in any way that attaches to the real world, but no one checks or no one's allowed to check. Or a situation where a politician is funded overwhelmingly in comparison to any opponents, so that politician would actually win if the votes in elections were real, but is still just a product of influence at the same level and will ultimately end up serving the influences on that level, marketing it all to the constituents the politician's supposed to represent as a product of their choice, doing their bidding. You can apply these principles broadly and realize that for all intents and purposes, that politician is not real, not legitimate, not the product of people's choice, and not serving their desires and concerns. And at that point, the entire concept of a people's representative has been inverted. That politician is a fake politician. Again, applying that construct broadly, and you see the orchestration, and that orchestration is absolutely a parallel to whoever is writing and producing a given season of World Wrestling Entertainment. There are plot lines, there are characters. It is meant to elicit an emotional response that will then elicit a real-world outcome. And for the purposes of World Wrestling Entertainment, that is attention and money. From the sales of advertisements on behalf of massive corporations to merchandising, to licensing the intellectual property for a video game, for instance, and it just keeps going. But we pretend in politics that it's all about having a government so the people know they're represented. But all of that is just corporate marketing and media being shown to everyone so that everyone will believe that the thing they're watching on television is important. They'd better participate in real life supporting this charade because they can't admit that it's not real. But it's not real. That doesn't mean that none of the things are happening in the real world. It means that our perception of these things is totally inverted. We are attributing all the aspects of the real thing to something that is purely fake. It exists on the layer of the false reality projected on top of reality prime and not at that reality prime layer, although there are various places it attaches and reflects a discernible reality in reality prime so that it can reach a point of minimal believability that convinces people it's not yet too embarrassing to continue participating in the kayfabe as if it's all real. Now, over the weekend on the Devolution Power Hour, I discussed very briefly Something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I've mentioned it a few times before, kind of with a broader description, primarily around the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and in regard to some of what I talk about when I talk about informational time travel and informational timelines. I think there's a level to which we are watching reenactments. I talked last week about viewing the Trump assassination event in parallel to the JFK assassination and the Ronald Reagan attempted assassination, using the details of what we are witnessing and what we are being told right now to better understand those past events, and using details of those past events in parallel to better understand what we are watching now. And the comparison that I used on Saturday night and have used a couple times in the past is this television show called Rescue 911. I saw a bunch of episodes of this show when I was a teenager. William Shatner was the host. Over the weekend, I said I thought it was Stacy Keach, but he was the host of Unsolved Mysteries. So William Shatner would host this show that would feature people who called 911, because the idea was you call 911, you get an immediate response to your crime. The police are going to come in and save you. There's a burglar in the house, call 911, and the police will be right there. And every week we would see a reenactment of this 911 call. The burglar breaks into the house. Things get very scary. Someone hides in a closet and dials 911 and then whispers to the 911 operator, and they already have that person's address, and a car is already on the way. And right before the burglar really gets away with it or really does some damage, the police arrive and they arrest this burglar and probably imprison him for the rest of his life. And all of this plays out very dramatically. And through that dramatic reenactment, we understand the principle. Rescue 911 is going to save your life. You don't need to defend yourself. We're here to defend you, and we will be there on a moment's notice unless you live, far away from a police station, and then it will work pretty much not at all. But keep watching the dramatic reenactment because we need to sell you laundry detergent. Now, I've talked many times about how the playbook plays out over and over again, cyclically around the world on slightly different timelines with variables in the details that reflect different cultural themes that account for different demographics. And we talked about how the playbook must be roughly the same because they're trying to elicit similar emotional and then behavioral responses from people who have been brainwashed with an understanding of that playbook and the expected responses to each one of the dramatic moments and traumatic moments that people will react to. We talked a few weeks ago after the debate about the infliction of these traumatic experiences, the collective catharsis people experience, and then the capturing of their collective attention so that it can be redirected toward the new agenda. The goal is the same. The intent is the same. That means the playbook has to be the same. And because of that, there are legitimate parallels between these historical events with one another, all of them revised, rewritten by the winners, and with what we're seeing now. Character archetypes are going to be the same, and the narrative movements are going to be the same. And because all of that information has always been handed down by authority, by the winners, the official story within the central narrative handed down to us by the authoritative source, communicated to us by the news and the rest of our popular culture, then to undo that, what we need is a reversal of that process. We need to see those same stories again, but in a way that emphasizes the opposite meaning. The polarity of each one of these issues needs to be reversed. Positive needs to become negative because everything has been written down from the perspective of the regime, from the perspective of the authoritative source. What we need to undo that is to see, we were deceived by the authoritative source. We were deceived by the news. Here's what each one of these stories really means, and we get to see it in all of its aspects. And when we are able to look at these stories in reverse and flip back the inversion of the polarity in each aspect, then all of a sudden, the entirety of the central narrative becomes a roadmap for every little piece of the manipulation. I would suggest that what we are witnessing broadly may well be that sort of reenactment. And we should hope that's what it is. We should hope that all of this fakery is designed to highlight and illustrate what has happened through the regular use of that playbook over and over and over again to traumatize and manipulate and ultimately control the minds of the people across the world. And then we should insist that that layer of fakery be removed, because to whatever extent people can influence public affairs and have some say in the rules and the regulations and the laws that govern all our lives, we will only be able to effect that when that layer of fakery and falsity is peeled away. At some point, we have to stop ourselves from being active participants in this collective fakery if we intend to move forward. Because if all of this is not to highlight and illustrate those elements of fakery, then it is just another brand of fakery being thrust upon us. At no time should we make it our mission to convince ourselves that all of it is real and that our brand of the fakery is actually just better in some way. It would be the exact same thing. Or maybe all of us just need to make that choice for ourselves. And people can continue on with that if they like. But as far as I'm concerned, I think as far as you're concerned, if we are going to be sovereign individuals who act upon the world rather than compliant subjects upon whom the world acts, then we need to recognize and remove the elements of fakery. And I am optimistic because it seems that we are slowly but surely reaching the point where other people are realizing that it's fake too. Here's Candace Owens letting her audience of normies know that at least some of what they're seeing is complete and utter bullshit.
You should not believe it. The things that are happening right now, they're like, oh my, Biden dropped out. And yeah, that's a really big announcement, but also there's a little piece of you that knows that all of this is a little fake and gay, right? Like, we know that we are not being told the truth. We've been talking about his mental faculties for 4 years now. And the Democrats now, oh, we saw the debate performance and now we realize it's performative.
And good for Candace Owens. She has a big audience of people who have been led to believe that all of this stuff is real the whole time. It is good that she is finally letting them off the hook. Nur bin Laden posted in a similar theme this morning on X, formerly Twitter, writing fake election, fake inauguration, fake presidency, fake resignation letter. And cheers to Nur bin Laden. Good for her for saying that. I have to wonder what kind of world we would have now if all of these mainstream television characters, and I'm not placing Nur bin Laden among them, by the way, though Candace Owens certainly is one, but what if all of these mainstream television characters who are giving us the based and red-pilled version of everything these days had been saying all of that back in 2021? What if they had just told their audiences, yeah, guys, all of this is fake. Joe Biden didn't receive 81 million real lawful American votes, and there's no reason to believe that he did. The election was rigged and stolen. Everyone knew that would happen for months in advance. There were extensive plans that were widely publicized. The very violent insurrection was obviously fake on some level. The inauguration of quote unquote President Biden was obviously fake on every level. And everything Donald Trump did before stepping off center stage incorporated the understanding of Joe Biden's illegitimacy. His public statements pointed it out before the country was ever even told that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. But because we have to reaffirm and reassert the reality of what we're watching on television, people pretended that the last 3.5 years have been something entirely other than what they have been. They incorporated the unwavering certainty of the false reality into everything they thought and communicated. And where are they now? Where are their audiences now? Everyone's just discovering for the first time, hey, it seems like something might be a little off here. Well, why is that? Because they allowed consensus derived from television, all of that from the authoritative source, of course, to determine what they would say and what they would believe and how they would act. They knew on some level that they were not telling the truth, but they went along with it anyway because they didn't want to seem crazy to people who actually believed it was all real. That's how a father might act about these professional wrestlers while watching professional wrestling with his little son. They had fun in the entertainment of it all. His son had his favorite characters, and they enjoyed watching that character win together. It's like the way parents might treat a child when it comes to Santa Claus. Well, Christmas is just a lot more fun because little Timmy believes in Santa Claus. We just love going along with the whole thing. That is what adults have done when it comes to politics in relation to other adults. Well, everyone's just agreed we're going to lie about this thing, so we'd better go ahead and lie. We wouldn't want to upset these people by telling them that John Cena is just an actor, even while he's acting in movies. Hulk Hogan was apparently so important and such a superstar that he still has to pretend he's the same guy he was when he was in the WWE, and he has to do it in his own real life. And then, because we don't want to point out how ridiculous and embarrassing that is, we go along with it. Now, a couple of weeks ago in that Catharsis episode, I talked about Joe Biden as a fall guy, something I've been discussing since late 2020 for legitimately 4 years now, talking about how Joe Biden was selected as the presidential candidate in 2020 and then the winner of the election in 2020. Because he was meant to be a fall guy. He was going to be the vessel that would have all the corruption, all the criminality of the global regime over the course of decades poured into it so that the vessel could then be washed out to sea. It would be gone forever. Everything the regime, the uniparty have ever done in the United States of America, all of it, could be blamed on Joe Biden, and the package of Joe Biden would just be washed away, and everyone's going to forget about all those problems. All the crimes against America, all the crimes against humanity, the proxy wars, the slave trade, the drug trade, the exploitations, the poisonings, the fake elections, all of that could simply be blamed on Joe Biden, put all of those concerns right into the vessel, stuff a cork in Joe Biden, and set him out to sea. He'll be the fall guy. He'll take the blame for all of it. A distraction will come along. Everyone will be told we need to move on from Joe Biden. He's not even there anymore. And it will be like none of those bad things ever happened. And so let's get into the last 24 hours. In the afternoon yesterday, July 21st, 2024, the @JoeBiden account on X, formerly Twitter, which is Joe Biden's personal account, an open letter was published to announce that Joe Biden was going to, quote unquote, turn down the nomination and would no longer be seeking a second term as fake president. He wrote, "My fellow Americans, over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, and he's capitalizing the N in nation for whatever reason, likely to emphasize the importance of the quote-unquote nation, of the state, as it exists in the collectivist ideology in opposition to the individual." But let's start that sentence over. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, and in expanding affordable health care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to 1 million veterans exposed to toxic substances, passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court, and pressed the most significant climate legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead than we are today. And what's the point of even analyzing any of that? I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together, we overcame a once-in-a-century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We've protected and preserved our democracy, capital D, and we've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation, again capitalized, later this week in more detail about my decision. For now, let me express my deepest gratitude to all those who have worked so hard to see me reelected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work. And let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. I believe today what I always have, that there is nothing America can't do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America. Now, immediately upon viewing this statement, I noticed, hey, this doesn't look like a presidential communication. It just says Joseph R. Biden Jr. at the top with a date. And then there's a signature, but it only looks sort of like Biden's signature. And so I posted, consider how ridiculous it is that we have to trust a Joe Biden internet letter that Joe Biden didn't write, tweeted out from his personal account, which he doesn't write, and not the official POTUS account, which he also doesn't write. Joe Biden wasn't necessary for any part of the process, same as the last 4 years, strange. And of course, I'm not the only person who noticed this, but that idea made its way around the internet pretty quickly over the course of yesterday, leading to presumably that statement we heard earlier by Candace Owens and the post from Noor bin Laden. Now the story floating around is that Joe Biden may have been incapacitated for more than just yesterday. Charlie Kirk wrote, got a weird lead on a story that people should look into. I got a call from a source close to Las Vegas Metro. The official story was that Joe Biden's trip was cut short last week due to COVID. However, according to this source, U.S. Secret Service informed Las Vegas Metro that there was an emergency situation involving Joe Biden and to close necessary streets so that POTUS, that being Joe Biden, could be transported immediately to University Medical, which they began to do in earnest. Then mysteriously, there was a stand-down order, and the Secret Service informed local Vegas PD that they were going to medevac POTUS to Johns Hopkins, which they presumed meant fly him back east ASAP. Apparently, the rumor mill in the police department was that Joe Biden was dying or possibly already dead. He said, I didn't think too much about this lead, seemed too wild to be true, but given that Joe Biden has been out of public sight for days and dropped out of the race via an X post, and his brother James indicated health was a factor, I'm beginning to grow more curious if COVID or something else has been more serious than reported. And of course, the info op and unrepentant normie Charlie Kirk has to go and say something ridiculous like maybe the COVID was more serious. And yeah, sure, maybe he also got impaled by a unicorn. But just consider this for a moment. The so-called president is being replaced in a so-called campaign leading up to a so-called election. And now the general public is realizing that Joe Biden might not even be alive and no one's told them. And I'm sure we'll get some sort of Joe Biden appearance on television this week. And that will mean absolutely nothing in relation to whether or not Joe Biden is alive. They announced on Wednesday that Joe Biden had COVID. So it's been 5 days already. And there's at least some indication that we might get told, hey, Joe Biden's dead. And that wouldn't shock me or you. But for people who've thought Joe Biden was a real president this whole time, that might be a little jarring. It's not like they wouldn't do this sort of thing. We were told that the quote unquote Queen of England was dead. And then they said, no, that's not true yet, and rescinded the claims before then publishing them again a few hours later. And all of that was very inconvenient because just 2 days prior to that, she had made a public appearance all done up, looking just spectacular, as she welcomed in the new British Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Should we really believe that the Queen was alive for that? We've been told for years that Jimmy Carter is on the verge of death. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on Jimmy Carter. He's being used as a narrative device by people who are supposed to be looking out for his best interests. So we have no choice but to analyze him, at least in part, as a narrative device. We've been told for months that he doesn't even wake up some days. And so I'm sure we can expect a state funeral or two over the course of these next 100 or so days until we reach the date of when that next fake election is supposed to take place. And so let's spend some time discussing the narratives that are emerging around the replacement of Joe Biden. There was an article in the Daily Mail from last evening that cut right to the chase. There's a hidden message in Biden's humiliating withdrawal letter that should terrify every American. And the shaming question, who on earth is running this country? Now, at some point, you'd think that people would begin to get a little insulted by their mainstream media figures and outlets and all of the television characters saying things like this to them that have been obvious for a really long time, as though all of the people disseminating the central narrative just figured it out. Wait a second. If Joe Biden is not even able to run for president anymore, and he's not even putting out his own announcements, well, who's running this whole show? It would be like a kid discovering that his parents have just been pretending to be Santa Claus the whole time, and the parents, when confronted, being like, wait, what? Are you saying we're Santa Claus? Wow. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but I just never knew. It would be like when one of those professional wrestling announcers steps up to one of the wrestlers and he says, hey, Captain Vicious Panther, Sergeant Machine Guns said something mean about your wife. What are you gonna do? Oh, you guys are gonna put on tight little pants and roll around in that square again? Oh, you're gonna launch a flying clothesline off that turnbuckle at him. I figured it would be something like that. The violence in your response really lets me know that your feelings are deeply hurt. And then you have to wonder, sadly, did these people really not understand that it's fake? And maybe let's just spend one more second with this. This woman, her name is Maureen Callahan, she's suggesting that she is just realizing that maybe Joe Biden's not running everything in this country. What does that look like? I mean, she's lying, right? Or she's spectacularly ignorant, but either through ignorance or dishonesty, she has played along with the entire charade up until now. But it didn't just become this way now. So how should we look at the fact that she's only just saying it now? Why didn't she call it fake earlier? Why didn't she at least question these things earlier? And I'm focusing in on this to illustrate the fact that if all this stuff actually is fake, calling it fake as soon as you realize it's fake is the best thing, the most intellectually honest thing, the most helpful thing, and the most serious and responsible thing you can do. It's not, in fact, irresponsible to call something fake as soon as you know it. Like, for instance, if you see paragliding go-karts flying over the most secure border in the history of the world, and you don't immediately point out, hey, that's fake, well, that's how massive wars can start, isn't it? If you don't point out, hey, that election's fake, that inauguration is fake, we're being led by a fake president. In fact, this country has been usurped. Well, wouldn't you know it? All sorts of bad things can happen to the country, while people who are hoping to profit off those bad things can tell everyone else that they're being serious and responsible by not stating the obvious. Oh, hey, that's fake. In the wake of this internet letter appearing on Joe Biden's personal Twitter feed, the news immediately scrambled to figure out how all of this happened. Politico reported yesterday in the afternoon, President Joe Biden's announcement stunned White House and campaign aides, who up until this afternoon were insisting that he would stay in the race. Many of them, including some senior aides, first found out that was no longer the case by reading the letter that Biden posted on X, formerly Twitter. We're all finding out by tweet, said one Democrat familiar with the immediate reaction. none of us understand what's happening. In a sign of the abruptness of Biden's decision, the campaign blasted out a fundraising email for Joe and Kamala at 1:54 p.m., 8 minutes after Biden announced he was stepping aside. Every normie who has ever paid the slightest amount of attention to politics knows how orchestrated and scripted political actions are. And we are told it has to be that way because the presentation needs to be perfect. We have all of these adversaries around the world who are looking for just one little slip up that they can take advantage of. We would never want to project weakness to the world. Everything is highly orchestrated, especially when it's presented to the public. But yet, an event of this magnitude and the people in Joe Biden's fake administration, including senior members of his fake administration, had no idea. They found out from Joe Biden's personal account on Twitter that they know Joe Biden doesn't write, in a letter that they also know Joe Biden didn't write. CNN let us know how this decision was made. Biden's final decision to leave the race was reached in the last 48 hours, a senior campaign advisor said, as he consulted family and top advisors by telephone while recovering from COVID. A source familiar with the matter said, the plans to exit the race began Saturday and were finalized on Sunday. Yes, they've been talking about it for a month, but the planning just started Saturday night and then happened on Sunday, and they didn't tell anybody about it. The advisor said the president was, quote unquote, not dug in, but was studying the data coming in and became convinced he would, quote unquote, weigh down the ticket and be a complication to defeating Trump. So in the false reality, we are pretending Joe Biden is a real, legitimate president who has his wits about him and is still making his own decisions, including political decisions. And he saw the polling and realized that the narratives being spun out on television for the last 4 weeks were actually true. Joe Biden, operating with his own agency as real president, was like, yeah, I've been fighting it, but the TV's right, and I should step aside. In fact, if I step aside, I'm going to be a hero. It's worth it. I'm going to step aside as fake president. I'm just going to have someone write a letter and then publish that letter on my personal Twitter account. Biden's decision did not have to do with any medical issue, a senior White House official told CNN. When Biden huddled with his 2 closest advisors Saturday, the information they provided on polling and where Democratic officials stood underscored that a path to victory was, quote unquote, basically non-existent. According to another person familiar with the matter, there wasn't any single poll number, wavering Democrat official, or fundraiser presented in the meeting with longtime aides Mike Donnellan and Steve Ricchetti that pushed Biden toward his decision, the person said. Instead, the information highlighted that the path back to a viable campaign had been severely damaged by declining national and swing state poll numbers, along with party defections that were likely to rapidly accelerate. The information included polling and details gathered from outreach outside Biden's inner circle. Unlike 2015, when Biden wrote in his book, Promise Me, Dad, that Donnellan told the then vice president he shouldn't launch a 2016 bid for president as he grieved the death of his son, Beau. Neither aide explicitly told Biden he should get out of the race, according to the person. So we have unnamed anonymous sources, people familiar with the matter, that say this is how that process went down. And the person familiar with the matter definitely was not Steve Ricchetti, even though Fox News reporter Jackie Heinrich posted on X, formerly Twitter, ran into Steve Ricchetti tonight as he was getting out of an elevator. I asked, "Are you okay? Is he okay?" "He's okay," Ricchetti said with a slight nod and a tight smile, and kept walking. Ricchetti helped Biden write his withdrawal letter in the overnight hours, according to the New York Times. Biden did not notify his VP, campaign manager, or chief of staff until this morning, this being Sunday. And the rest of his staff didn't find out until a minute before he posted the letter to social media, despite them saying that they found out after he posted the letter. Steve Ricchetti merely helped write the letter and definitely did not tell CNN how the whole process went down. You heard the mention there of Joe Biden's brother, Frank. CBS News' White House correspondent Nancy Cortez wrote, Frank Biden told CBS News that his brother's health, quote, in my humble opinion, absolutely, end quote, contributed to his decision to bow out. But source close to Biden family says, quote, Frank Biden suffers from alcoholism and hasn't spoken to his brother in weeks. What he said is completely untrue, end quote. So apparently Joe Biden doesn't have a health problem because Frank Biden is an alcoholic. Speaking of Biden crime family members, Hunter issued a statement last night as well, writing, for my entire life, I've looked at my dad in awe. How could he suffer so much heartache and yet give so much of whatever remained of his heart to others? Not only in the policies he passed, but in the individual lives he's touched. Over a lifetime, I have witnessed him absorb the pain of countless everyday Americans who he's given his personal phone number to because he wanted them to call him when they were hurting, when their last hopes were slipping through their hands. That unconditional love has been his North Star as president and as a parent. He is unique in public life today in that there is no distance between Joe Biden the man and Joe Biden the public servant of the last 54 years. I'm so lucky every night I get to tell him I love him and to thank him. I ask all Americans to join me tonight in doing the same. Thank you, Mr. President. I love you, Dad. And I'm sure that is extremely real, very heartfelt, and 100% honest. Soon after the initial announcement letter was posted on Biden's personal account by someone obviously other than Joe Biden, the Joe Biden account followed up, writing, my fellow Democrats, I have decided not to accept the nomination and to focus all my energies on my duties as president for the remainder of my term. My very first decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Kamala Harris as my vice president, and it's been the best decision I made. Today, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this. Now, Trump described Kamala as Biden's best decision just a couple of weeks ago, saying that she was Biden's insurance policy. And I guess we'll get to see how that plays out. But according to Biden's Twitter account, she was indeed his best decision, despite the fact that she is one of the dumbest and most annoying politicians to ever enter American public life. Kamala responded to the announcement in a statement of her own. On behalf of the American people, I thank Joe Biden for his extraordinary leadership as president of the United States and for his decades of service to our country. His remarkable legacy of accomplishment is unmatched in modern American history, surpassing the legacy of many presidents who have served 2 terms in office. It is a profound honor to serve as his vice president, and I am deeply grateful to the president, Dr. Biden, and the entire Biden family. I first came to know President Biden through his son, Beau. We were friends from our days working together as attorneys general of our home states, and it was also rumored that they had a romantic, let's say, relationship. As we worked together, Beau would tell me stories about his dad, the kind of father and the kind of man he was. And the qualities Beau revered in his father are the same qualities, the same values I have seen every single day in Joe Biden's leadership as president. His honesty and integrity, his big heart and commitment to his faith and his family, and his love of our country and the American people. With this selfless and patriotic act, President Biden is doing what he has done throughout his life of service, putting the American people and our country above everything else. I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. Over the past year, I have traveled across the country talking with Americans about the clear choice in this momentous election. And that is what I will continue to do in the days and weeks ahead. I will do everything in my power to unite the Democrat Party and unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda. We have 107 days until Election Day. Together, we will fight, and together, we will win. So apparently she's going to participate in the Project 2025 agenda narrative as well, even though Trump has consistently said that he's got nothing to do with the Project 2025 agenda. And that would be relatively obvious for anyone who actually reads the 2025 agenda. They have entire plans written out for departments and agencies that Trump has already promised to disband and remove. It's absolutely clear that the Project 2025 agenda is not the Trump agenda. Trump's agenda is called Agenda 47, and you can find it on Trump's website. Project 2025, in its best description, is nothing more than a catalog of policy proposals. It's not about Donald Trump. It is about the controlled opposition putting their people into the administrative state and running it themselves under the guise of an America First agenda. And it's worth noting that J.D. Vance has made statements to that effect in the past. He wants to remove everyone from that administrative state bureaucracy and replace them with our guys. That's not what I want to do. That's not what Trump said he wants to do. I doubt that's what many of you want to do. The point is not to replace the administrative state personnel with different personnel and keep the administrative state in place. The point is to remove the administrative state. They are unelected, and despite that, they are still making determinations on the minutia by which people are forced to live their lives. An account on X, formerly Twitter, called Old Row Swig, who seems to be fairly popular on there, posted this morning, I'm hearing that Heritage, the Heritage Foundation, who wrote Project 2025, is paying conservative influencers to undermine President Trump over Project 2025. And he asks Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation, is this true? And of course, that would not be remotely surprising. Conservative influencers online are by and large anti-Trump. That's what they make the money for. The controlled opposition shares in the rewards of the regime. They do not get censored. They do not get marginalized. They get giant followings and a lot of money because they are pushing the controlled opposition viewpoint and agenda, which is just the uniparty right branding of the uniparty agenda. But let's get some more of these responses before we move on. Gavin Newsom, the illegitimate governor of California, wrote on X, formerly Twitter, yesterday, tough, fearless, tenacious. With our democracy at stake and our future on the line, no one is better to prosecute the case against Donald Trump's dark vision and guide our country in a healthier direction than America's Vice President, Kamala Harris. Joe Manchin, the so-called senator from West Virginia, who now pretends to be an independent, is, sources close to him claim, according to CNN's Jake Tapper, considering re-registering as a Democrat and throwing his hat into the ring. Joe Manchin might join in the elimination-style tournament to win the nomination for candidates to oppose Donald Trump in this fake election, and maybe even be considered for a time the fake president if we indeed get the hose again. And people do seem highly motivated to get the hose again. They just don't want to let go of that layer of false reality. They want all of this to be real because that would mean that it's always been real and they haven't just wasted their time. Perhaps it just has to go in stages and everyone needs to get the hose however many times it takes to reach a certain level of wet and cold and shivering before they are willing to admit what is staring them right in the face. Elizabeth Warren posted on X, formerly Twitter, one of the most boring statements of all time, and just simply wrote, I endorse Kamala Harris for president. The Clintons released a statement shortly after the announcement letter was posted yesterday on Joe Biden's personal Twitter account that he does not run. And if you thought Joe Biden's letterhead was ugly and Kamala Harris's letterhead was non-existent, it just said statement from Vice President Kamala Harris, the Clintons is even worse. It's just a dark blue background with white lettering that says statement from President Clinton and Secretary Clinton. President Biden has capped his extraordinary career of service with a presidency that has lifted America out of an unprecedented pandemic. created millions of new jobs, rebuilt a battered economy, strengthened our democracy, and restored our standing in the world. By any measure, he has advanced our founders' charge to build a more perfect union and his own stated goal of restoring the soul of our nation. We join millions of Americans in thanking President Biden for all he has accomplished, standing up for America time and time again, with his North Star always being what's best for the country. President Biden has a bunch of North Stars, apparently. We are honored to join the president in endorsing Vice President Harris and will do whatever we can to support her. We've lived through many ups and downs, but nothing has made us more worried for our country than the threat posed by a second Trump term. He has promised to be a dictator on day one, and the recent ruling by his servile Supreme Court will only embolden him to further shred the Constitution. Now is the time to support Kamala Harris and fight with everything we've got to elect her. America's future depends on it. Hillary followed up this morning on X, formerly Twitter, with a picture of her next to a younger Kamala Harris, writing, "I've known Kamala Harris a long time. This brilliant prosecutor will make the case against convicted felon Donald Trump and the Project 2025 agenda to take away our freedoms. But she can't do it alone. Become a part of this historic campaign today." It's like they just set all of this in place and planned this messaging well in advance. And despite Trump disavowing the Project 2025 agenda, they've already sold it, so they're going to continue to use it, even though it is now completely detached from any discernible reality. Now, we're going to check out Barack Hussein Obama's statement in just a moment, but it's funny, Saturday evening, a clip from a debate during the 2008 primaries, the clip itself is from 2007, featured Obama and Biden in this exchange.
Barack got tested for AIDS. There's no shame in being tested for AIDS. It's an important thing because the fact of the matter is in the community's engaged in denial. They're engaged in denial. No one wants to talk about it in the community, and we do not have enough leaders in the community and outside the community demanding we face the reality, confront the men in the community as well as the women, letting them know there are alternatives. Thank you.
Travis, I just got to make clear, I got tested with Michelle. When we were in Kenya and Africa, so I don't want any confusion here about what's going on.
And I got tested to save my life because I had 13 pints of blood
with my wife.
And I'm sure Michelle appreciates you clarifying.
So that was Joe Biden pointing out that Barack Obama was gay, and Hillary Clinton was nodding right along. And then Barack Obama made it very clear that he's definitely not gay. He went and got tested with Michelle, who everybody knows is a woman. And that's true despite all the stories about how Barack Obama is gay, including in the letters Barack Obama wrote about how he's gay. But we're not supposed to say that because the character of Barack Hussein Obama is said to be not gay. And that's true no matter how many of his chefs he goes paddleboarding with. But here's the country's first openly homosexual president commenting yesterday about Joe Biden refusing to accept the nomination. Joe Biden has been one of America's most consequential presidents, as well as a dear friend and partner to me. Today, we've also been reminded again that he's a patriot of the highest order. 16 years ago, when I began my search for a vice president, I knew about Joe's remarkable career in public service. But what I came to admire even more was his character, his deep empathy and hard-earned resilience, his fundamental decency and belief that everyone counts. Since taking office, President Biden has displayed that character again and again. He helped end the pandemic, created millions of jobs, lowered the cost of prescription drugs, passed the first major piece of gun safety legislation in 30 years, made the biggest investment to address climate change in history, and fought to ensure the rights of working people to organize for fair wages and benefits. Internationally, he restored America's standing in the world, revitalized NATO, and mobilized the world to stand up against Russian aggression in Ukraine. More than that, President Biden has pointed us away from the 4 years of chaos, falsehood, and division that characterized Donald Trump's administration. Through his policies and his example, Joe has reminded us of who we are at our best. A country committed to old-fashioned values like trust and honesty, kindness and hard work. A country that believes in democracy, rule of law, and accountability. A country that insists that everyone, no matter who they are, has a voice and deserves a chance at a better life. This outstanding track record gave President Biden every right to run for re-election and finish the job he started. Joe understands better than anyone the stakes in this election, how everything he has fought for throughout his life and everything the Democrat Party stands for will be at risk if we allow Donald Trump back in the White House and give Republicans control of Congress. I also know Joe has never backed down from a fight. For him to look at the political landscape and decide he should pass the torch to a new nominee is surely one of the toughest in his life. And that is terrible grammar. But I know he wouldn't make this decision unless he believed it was right for America. It's a testament to Joe Biden's love of country and a historic example of a genuine public servant, once again putting the interests of the American people ahead of his own, that future generations of leaders will do well to follow. We will be navigating uncharted waters in the days ahead, but I have extraordinary confidence that the leaders of our party will be able to create a process from which an outstanding nominee emerges. I believe that Joe Biden's vision of a generous, prosperous, and united America that provides opportunity for everyone will be on full display at the Democrat convention in August. And I expect that every single one of us are prepared to carry that message of hope and progress forward into November and beyond. For now, Michelle and I just want to express our love and gratitude to Joe and Jill for leading us so ably and courageously during these perilous times, and for their commitment to the ideals of freedom and equality that this country was founded on. And so now all the major players are accounted for, except, of course, Joe Biden. The only proof that Joe Biden has any involvement in this process is that letter that Biden didn't write, posted on his personal Twitter account that he doesn't manage. But we were told a few weeks ago by Charlie Savage at the Daily Mail that there would have to be agreement between Pelosi, Schumer, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden himself in order to remove Joe Biden as the Democrat candidate in this fake campaign. We are now being told that they have all agreed, and the jockeying for which one of their selected candidates will be named the new candidate in this fake campaign is yet to be determined. But initially, everyone is pretending it is going to be Kamala, because otherwise they would have to admit that too many aspects are fake. People would not be able to handle all of that at one time. Hey, we're getting rid of Biden. We're actually also getting rid of Kamala. And we're either going to replace them with some people you've never heard of, some people you don't like, some people you have already rejected, or maybe, just maybe, that guy who was already president and the man playing his wife. And we will come back to Kamala in a little bit. But here is the statement from Speaker of the House Mike Johnson yesterday. At this unprecedented juncture in American history, we must be clear about what just happened. The Democrat Party forced the Democrat nominee off the ballot just over 100 days before the election, having invalidated the votes of more than 14 million Americans who selected Joe Biden to be the Democrat nominee for president. The self-proclaimed party of democracy has proven exactly the opposite. Now, to be clear, there's absolutely no proof anywhere that 14 million Americans actually came out and selected Joe Biden in that fake primary process, but they did tally 14 million reported Joe Biden votes during that fake primary process. The party's prospects are no better now with Vice President Kamala Harris, who co-owns the disastrous policy failures of the Biden administration. As second in command and a completely inept border czar, Harris has been a gleeful accomplice, not only in the destruction of American sovereignty, security, and prosperity, but also in the largest political cover-up in U.S. history. She is known as long as anyone of his incapacity to serve. Naturally, that is true, but it's also true for Everyone in any position of power, and probably almost every one of the people who voted for him in 2020 already knowing that, not that the elections are real. People actually went out and signed on to this debacle and embarrassment. And the fact that the elections are fake and they pretend otherwise only makes it more shameful. Johnson continues, regardless of the chaos in the current White House, our adversaries around the globe should be reminded that the U.S. Congress, the U.S. military, and the American people are fully prepared and committed to defend our interests both at home and abroad. Now, that's interesting because the Speaker of the House is the second in the line of succession. It goes president, vice president, and then Speaker of the House. The Congress is the body that declares war, and believing the military is under the command of Joe Biden or that it might be under the command of Kamala Harris is ridiculous. It could not be more obvious at this point that Joe Biden doesn't control anything. And it sounds to my ear like Mike Johnson is signaling that things remain under stable control, though of course not under the control of Joe Biden. The details of that situation, of course, remain hazy, although less hazy over time, I would say. If Joe Biden is not fit to run for president, Johnson writes, he is not fit to serve as president. He must resign the office immediately. November 5th cannot arrive soon enough. Now, of course, I see no reason why this should happen. It doesn't have to happen. Joe Biden is not in any meaningful way in the office of president and never has been. Resigning that office will be a narrative move only, and Kamala Harris taking over will be the same. Whatever state it is we are in, we've been in it for well over 3.5 years now. So we do not need to pretend that doing it for another 6 months makes any difference. The powerful foreign leaders around the world are not going to take advantage of this new projected American weakness. It's been the same the whole time. Donald Trump, by the way, just met with the comedic actor from Ukraine, who is not a legitimate president, but is still seen as the leader of that quote unquote country, Volodymyr Zelensky, so that they could plot out the Russia-Ukraine peace process. Joe Biden, not involved. As usual, Joe Biden is totally unnecessary. Despite that, the media is telling us that today, Joe Biden, the U.S. president, is meeting with his national security officials. And sure he is. Naturally, MSNBC was tasked with setting out all of the new slogans that the standard issue villagers of the uniparty left would then go out and repeat. Here is Rachel Maddow setting the Joe Biden vessel out to sea.
I mean, this is history writ large. You know, we'll all remember where we were and what we were doing at this moment. And just thinking about the president right now, you know, what a man, what a patriot. What an act of selfless devotion to your country. And he has been a phenomenal president. He brought us back from COVID. He gave us the best recovery from COVID of any major nation on earth at a time when the world has economically been struggling in the wake of COVID. The Biden economy is literally the envy of the world. He ended the presidency of Donald Trump at one disastrous term. And he did it while being decent and civil and honorable and normal and occasionally boring at a time when boring was absolutely what we needed. And I just, his career of decades in public service as a senator and as a very successful vice president and as a phenomenally successful president, there is no single thing that he has done in that entire career that is a greater or more consequential act of service and sacrifice to this country than what he has done today. And knowing him a little bit, knowing his personality, having spoken to him, a number of times in my life, both in sort of official and unofficial capacities, I cannot see anywhere in his personality where this decision today was possible. This is the opposite of something that is natural or easy for for him. He is just not built to do something like this because his superpower is being underestimated. And that's why he's been so resolute in resisting all these calls for him to drop out. But him making this decision today is to give the country a chance, a reasonable chance at not putting Donald Trump back in the White House, not putting a president back in the White House who refused to leave the last time and summoned an angry mob to try to overthrow the government rather than go. This is Joe Biden saying, apparently it's not me, the one that gives us the best chance to do that. It's got to be somebody else, and so I will step aside. I'm just blown away by the sacrifice and the patriotism that this moment embodies.
I have to admit that I'm a little sad we're not going to get to see them expose Joe Biden as a man who was mentored for decades in politics by a Klansman. But I guess they've decided that he's left, in quotes, at the right time. So now they'll just honor him. Now Rachel Maddow is just pulling back the string of her bow, letting that flaming arrow fire out over the water, lighting up Joe Biden's funeral pyre as the vessel drifts out into the ocean. Oh, Joe Biden, he was actually too good for us and too good for this world. Old Scranton Joe, he's not built for giving up, and so stepping down in this situation was just not in his character. He knew it was what he had to do to save our democracy, and so he did it. And whoever he's replaced with, why, that person is going to give us a better chance. Whatever it takes to beat Trump, that's what we have to do. He's so dangerous. Do you all remember the very violent insurrection that he incited? Do you remember how he mishandled the very deadly pandemic, causing all of you to kill your grandmothers? Do you remember how Donald Trump would have never fought off Vladimir Putin and saved our democracy in Ukraine, but Joe Biden did it? I mean, he didn't really do it, but he said he was gonna do it, and that's all that matters. Let's get Morning Mika's version.
Joe Biden is a patriot. I love him. I love his family, and I love what he's done for the country. He had authenticity and touch, whether you saw it or not, but everything about him, even sometimes the stutter and the bumbling was part of the touch, part of the sort of empathic, very loving, very clear-eyed touch that he had that allowed him and enabled him to be an effective president. But all of that turned against him after the debate for all the reasons that we discussed. And he would say, no time to complain about it. Let's move on. It's go time.
I hope everyone is clear about the fact that this is communist propaganda. We used to hear stories about how the North Korean dictator would play golf and shoot a hole-in-one on every hole. That's how, we were told, state media would cover a communist dictator. No matter what he did, it was the greatest thing. No matter who he was actually the greatest person. He was too good for all of us. Morning Mika just said she loves Joe Biden. However good you might think he is, he's actually way better than that. He's just got this empathy. He's just got this touch. And it's very interesting that she's highlighting Joe Biden's touch since he's got a long history of publicly groping children. Joe Biden declaring that he would run for president and then running in the primaries and having Democrat voters vote in the primaries and selecting Joe Biden because they were told they didn't have any other choice. And they also kind of all know that the elections are rigged anyway. And then Joe Biden, after all of that, stepping down to let someone else run and be chosen as the candidate by delegates, not by any voters. That's not only the best thing that Joe Biden could have done for the country, despite the obvious deception, it's the best thing anyone has ever done for the country. In fact, Joe Biden is George Washington. We don't deserve him. And he's so good that he's actually impossible to replace, except for the fact that this is all about replacing him with someone else who couldn't possibly be another George Washington or even better than Joe Biden's George Washington, but also will definitely be that good. In fact, whoever the nominee is, whether it's Kamala Harris or it's someone else, but for now we're pretending Kamala Harris not to look too anti-democratic, when Kamala Harris, or whoever we replace Kamala Harris with, wins, they should get a Nobel Peace Prize, just like Obama. If Obama can win a Nobel Peace Prize just for being elected president of America as a half-black homosexual man, then whoever's nominated and is announced as the winner of this rigged and stolen election should get probably 2 Nobel Peace Prizes, because they will have saved democracy in ways that Barack Obama, as a half-black gay man, could only dream of. This is the greatest story of all time. I'm sure you'll all agree. Let's get just a touch more from Morning Mika.
Donald Trump is not easy to beat. He is not easy to beat, and anyone who thinks he is back at 2016 when they're laughing at the concept. And you can see how quickly they tried to steal the unity narrative. And I've heard from inside Republican circles and right-wing media that the hate campaign against Kamala Harris has begun. You'll notice they purposefully pronounce her name wrong. They say Kamala. They do it all the time. It is on purpose. But the talk is to start that hate campaign and get it going and start it churning. So my hope is that major Democrats and major Republicans, from the Obamas to the Bush family to military leaders, get behind the democracy ticket and we move on. That same lens, whether it's opinion writers or thought leaders, that same lens, that focus needs to be put back on Donald Trump, because he's the old one now, and many would argue he has been unfit since day one of his first presidency. And if you use that same lens, you will find a man who is mentally unfit every day, who doesn't make sense every day. When he does make sense, he sounds like a white nationalist. When he does make sense, he seems to be in love with Vladimir Putin. When he does make sense, he calls the convicted criminals who rioted at the Capitol, defecated all over the Capitol, tried to kill the vice president and Nancy Pelosi, the people who were convicted and in prison. He calls them hostages and says he will pardon them. And obviously, he's a man who tried to steal a free and fair election.
Amazing, isn't it? How quickly and easily Mika Brzezinski goes from saying that right-wing media figures are actually waging a hate campaign by saying Kamala, to accusing Trump supporters of defecating all over the Capitol and trying to kill Mike Pence. In a few weeks, they are going to be calling it racist to say Kamala rather than Kamala. It's amazing what's possible when the winners are telling us what's happening. What does it mean about past hate movements when scapegoating normal citizens based on their political and religious beliefs on national television is not a hate movement, but mispronouncing Kamala is? It's almost like everything is just relative to the viewpoint of history's repeated winners who simply revise everything whenever they want. They're also now telling us that Donald Trump is too old to be president. They said it the entire time, even though Joe Biden was older and the one who was clearly mentally and physically incapacitated. And because they kept that going and Joe Biden's gone, now all of that is just their investment into painting Donald Trump as old and mentally and physically incapacitated. Who could have seen it coming? So MSNBC disseminated all of the news slogans that make up the official story within the central narrative. They told people what the new agreed upon, approved of viewpoint was about all this. They seeded that into the public conversation. It was repeated by standard issue villagers on the uniparty left. And then later this morning, Kamala Harris herself went out to give a speech addressing all this, even though Joe Biden hasn't been heard from.
And I wanted to say a few words about our president. Joe Biden's legacy of accomplishment over the past 3 years is unmatched in modern history. In one term, he has already, yes, you may clap. In one term, he has already surpassed the legacy of most presidents who have served 2 terms in office. And I first came to know President Biden through his son, Beau. We worked together as attorneys general in our states, and back then, Bo would often tell me stories about his dad. He would talk about the kind of father and the kind of man that Joe Biden is. The qualities that Bo revered in his father are the same qualities that I have seen every day in our president. His honesty, his integrity, his commitment to his faith and his family, his big heart, and his love, deep love of our country. And I am firsthand witness that every day our President Joe Biden fights for the American people, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for his service to our nation.
And so MSNBC then puts Kamala Harris up on television so that she can read the statement that she released yesterday, hammering home the point that Joe Biden really is just too good for all of us. He's so good that we are just going to endlessly and mindlessly repeat compliments that don't reflect the reality of Joe Biden at all, while we just shiv him over and over again. And once we spend a few days or a week or a couple of weeks honoring him, then we'll say things like, well, Joe Biden was a great man and a great president, but he got this thing wrong and that thing wrong. And a few months after that, all of a sudden, Joe Biden will be getting blamed for absolutely everything, because that's what fall guys are for. Joe Biden was great, but now we have to move on. Now, for whatever reason, the fake president, his fake administration, his fake vice president, and all of the other so-called power players in the Democrat Party didn't let AOC know what she was supposed to be saying. She's actually worried that this is some kind of coup, since Joe Biden is a real sitting president. And it's become clear, because there's no confirmation of any of this directly from Joe Biden, that people have gone around Joe Biden to get all of this done. In fact, now we're hearing that it's all a coup.
And I'm going to say what a lot of these folks aren't saying. I'm just going to say it. If you think that there is consensus among the people who want Joe Biden to leave, that they will support Kamala, Vice President Harris, you would be mistaken. And I'm going to say that because if they're going to come out and say all their little things on background off the record, but they're not going to be fully honest, I'm going to be honest for them. I'm in these rooms. I see what they say in conversations. A lot of them are not just interested in removing the president. They are interested in removing the whole ticket.
Now, wait a second. Joe Biden stepping down, he endorsed Kamala Harris. All the power players are honoring Joe Biden and endorsing Kamala Harris, but they really want to get both of them out there. What are they going to do? Take Joe Biden out so Kamala levels up to president, and then they bring someone new in? Who could that person be? Could it be Hillary Clinton? Well, sure, it could be. In fact, I said that back in like 2021. It's amazing what can be accomplished when you realize that all that matters is the court of public opinion. They don't care about the party's bylaws. They don't care about election laws in states. They don't care about any of the laws in this country. They certainly don't care about the Constitution, and they definitely don't care about the Constitution in its original form. All they care about is what they can get away with, to the extent that enough people will believe them so that it doesn't become a problem. It doesn't even require a majority, a loud 10% for a couple of days until they can distract people again. They'll just continue to twist the knobs within the incentive and punishment structure. Whatever it is, they believe they will eventually control the conversation and guide public opinion to a point where they can just continue moving forward with their agenda. All that matters is the court of public opinion. They get mass public acceptance of the fact that Joe Biden will not be the Democrat candidate for this fake election. A bunch of people already didn't want him to be, but then there were a whole lot of people who went out and quote unquote voted for him. And they all have this pretense of democracy that they really care about. They're going to override the voters. Joe's just going to step down. Well, I guess it's about his health. So he's making the responsible decision for everyone. It wouldn't be right to allow Donald Trump to potentially win because people are concerned about Biden's health. And they'll repeat it. They'll go along with it. And then they'll be told Donald Trump and his MAGA supporters, they really are that dangerous. You got to do what we said. And people will do what they've said. All the nonsense about democracy will be gone as soon as public opinion shifts. And if the public raises a stink about Joe Biden not being able to perform his duties as president, if he can't successfully run a campaign due to his mental and physical incapacitation, well, they're going to slowly let the air out of this jarring event, and then they'll move to the next jarring event. And after that, another jarring event could follow. And it will never be seen as a coup as long as the consensus in the court of public opinion allows them to keep taking the next step without too much interference. After AOC announcing that the powers that be want both Biden and Harris gone, AOC gave her endorsement last night, writing, Kamala Harris will be the next president of the United States. I pledge my full support to ensure her victory in November. Now more than ever, it is crucial that our party and country swiftly unite to defeat Donald Trump and the threat to American democracy. Let's get to work. We have the influencer class on the uniparty right reaffirming that this is indeed a coup against the Biden-Harris administration coming from their own side. And of course, that's coming from people like Thomas Massie, who have pretended for the last 4 years that Joe Biden is a real legitimate president who I guess secured somehow 81 million real lawful American votes. It's strange that these people didn't realize that the coup happened in 2020, and there have probably been plenty before that, but they've totally ignored our rigged and stolen elections. In fact, people like Massie and his pal Chip Roy went out and supported the Ron DeSantis op involving themselves in directing the hate movement toward Donald Trump and MAGA, toward normal Americans who support Donald Trump. And they were doing that to support Donald Trump's replacement as the leader of his own movement. They wanted to put Ron DeSantis, the Trump-light candidate, in Donald Trump's place. They know that our elections are rigged and stolen, of course. And rather than ensure that power is returned to the duly elected president, they instead decided to help the uniparty regime in ushering Donald Trump permanently out of the American political conversation. It's strange that they are now recognizing this as the coup, despite neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris being legitimate at all in the first place. And consider that a big part of the Ron DeSantis supporter movement was based on calling Trump supporters cultists. That was one of their favorite claims. Yes, they are Trump deranged. Yes, they participate fully in the false reality. And they believe that Donald Trump's supporters are the ones in the cult, despite Donald Trump's supporters being the ones who didn't do things like take the vaccine that they also blame on Donald Trump. They say Donald Trump was responsible for the vaccine and for people taking the vaccine, and therefore responsible for any vaccine injuries that may have occurred, while the very people they refer to as cultists were the people most likely not to take that vaccine. But I digress. Think about the establishment. Think about establishment voters. Think about the standard issue villagers on the uniparty left. All of these people are just waiting to be told who it is they will support harder than they've ever supported anyone in their lives. They are going to vote absolutely as hard as they can and then agree to repeat whatever nonsense they need to repeat in order to, quote unquote, win another stolen election. They now have no idea who they intend to do that for, but they know they are going to do it. And they will also tell you all of that will be true no matter who is chosen, because that's how bad Donald Trump and his supporters are. I have said it many times before. I will say it again. We are not a cult. They are a hate movement. Right and wrong for them, good and evil for them, are based on whether or not people support Donald Trump, which grows crazier by the day as Donald Trump's vast majority in this country continues to grow. These people are a small and shrinking minority, and they are still waging a public hate movement. It is a very, very bad idea. But to people suffering a total inversion within the false reality, it's actually the smartest thing. These people are broken. And they're not the only ones. Throughout the fake primary process, throughout 2022 and 2023, honestly, we talked about the Uniparty. We talked about the Uniparty right. We talked about how this was a period of rhino hunting, that the Republican establishment and elites needed to be exposed in the same way that the Democrat Party needed to be exposed. We are going to be better off in the future with zero political parties, which mean both parties have to go away. Even if you believed that the establishment within the Republican Party was somehow better than the Democrat establishment, and of course they're not, they're controlled opposition. They're parts of the same thing. They are different brands of one thing with one purpose. But even if you believed that somehow they were better relatively than the Democrat brand, I think by now people should be able to see that we are best served by having no political parties. It is clear to me that that is supposed to be the end result of whatever this experience we're having right now is. The point of all this disclosure, all this exposure, is to teach the lesson that these things are spoiled rotten from the very roots of them. There is no good version of this political party system and apparatus. This is actually the vehicle through which controlled opposition dynamics are created. It's part of the problem. It is inherent. And I think by now that should probably go without saying, but it's always fun to have a little additional proof. This is from Newsweek yesterday. Nikki Haley voter PAC, Political Action Committee, announces support for Kamala Harris. A coalition of former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley voters pledged their support for Democrat Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential bid on Sunday, hours after Joe Biden announced he was dropping out. The Political Action Committee, previously known as Haley Voters for Biden, which now features Harris's name, seeks to amplify the voices of former Haley voters in support of Harris's White House bid. Now, this PAC was not actually directly affiliated with Nikki Haley, but they claim to have raised over $1 million for her in the primary process in announcing that they were switching from being Haley voters for Biden to Haley voters for Harris. They also encouraged her to select a running mate like the illegitimate governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, or the illegitimate governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, or maybe even North Carolina's Roy Cooper. Now, in response to the events of yesterday and this thrust toward Kamala Harris actually being the Democrat candidate, though she is not technically any such thing, it's going to be necessary to address the question of whether or not Kamala Harris is even eligible to serve as president of the United States, or for that matter, as vice president of the United States. Because if she's not actually eligible for that, well, then whoever placed her in any position of power or public trust might more easily be seen as the sort of person trying to enact a coup on behalf of foreign powers. And of course, everything our government does is on behalf of foreign powers because it is now explicitly part of an overriding global regime agenda toward globalism and works in conjunction with global government. It is a giving away of our sovereignty that has happened now over the course of many decades, and you could even argue centuries. Here is constitutional scholar John Eastman from an op-ed he published in Newsweek on August 12, 2020. It now exists on Newsweek's website with a few paragraph editorial statement and a link to an opposing argument because this was just too controversial. They couldn't allow someone to be questioning the eligibility of our first black female president, just like you weren't allowed to question the eligibility of our first black homosexual president. Here is Eastman. The fact that Kamala Harris has just been named the vice presidential running mate for presumptive Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden has some questioning her eligibility for the position. The 12th Amendment provides that no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. And Article 2 of the Constitution specifies that, quote, no person except a natural born citizen shall be eligible to the office of president, end quote. Her father was and is a Jamaican national. Her mother was from India, and neither was a naturalized citizen at the time of Harris's birth in 1964. That, according to these commentators, makes her not a natural born citizen and therefore ineligible for the office of the president and hence ineligible for the office of vice president. Nonsense runs the counter commentary. Indeed, PolitiFact rated the claim of ineligibility as pants on fire false. Snopes rated it simply false, and from the other side of the political spectrum, conservative Daily News likewise rated it false. All three and numerous others simply assert that Harris is eligible because she was born in Oakland and is therefore a natural-born citizen from the location of birth. The 14th Amendment says so, they all claim, and the Supreme Court so held in the 1898 case of U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. But Eastman writes that those claims are erroneous, at least under the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment. And once again, we are focused on a 14th Amendment issue, one of the Reconstruction Amendments. And of course, this is the one in particular that George P. Fletcher cited in our secret Constitution as the amendment that allowed for the total upending of the original Constitution. This replaced the focus on the sovereign individual with the focus on the good of the nation. It replaced the republic with a democracy, and it replaced a focus on personal liberty with equality. This amendment, improperly ratified as it was, in the midst of a war being waged by the American government against the American people, having conscripted slave laborers and foreign immigrants into the army, totally inverted the purpose of the American Constitution. Fletcher, in his book, was bragging about that and using it as a point of honor and reverence for Abraham Lincoln. It's not something he wanted hidden. And in this period, we have lawsuit after lawsuit, including the Trump indictments and the efforts to keep him off the ballot, all referencing the 14th Amendment. It should be clear that George Fletcher was correct. Not only was that amendment intended to upend the Constitution, it's being used to continue the upending of the Constitution even 160 years later. Eastman writes, the language of Article 2 is that one must be a natural-born citizen. The original Constitution did not define citizenship, but the 14th Amendment does, and it provides that, quote, all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. Those who claim that birth alone is sufficient overlook the second phrase. The person must also be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and that meant subject to the complete jurisdiction, not merely a partial jurisdiction, such as that which applies to anyone temporarily sojourning in the United States, whether lawfully or unlawfully. Such was the view of those who authored the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause of the Supreme Court of the United States in the 1872 slaughterhouse cases and the 1884 case of Elk versus Wilkins, of Thomas Cooley, the leading constitutional treatise writer of the day, and of the State Department, which in the 1880s issued directives to U.S. embassies to that effect. Eastman continues through more of the historical arguments and then writes, if Harris was not a citizen at birth, we would need to know when, if ever, she became a citizen. Her father's biographical page at Stanford University identifies his citizenship status as follows: Jamaica by birth, U.S. by naturalization. But there is some dispute over whether he was in fact ever naturalized, and it is also unclear whether Harris's mother ever became a naturalized citizen. If neither was ever naturalized, or at least not naturalized before Harris's 16th birthday, which would have allowed her to obtain citizenship derived from their naturalization under the immigration law at the time, then she would have had to become a naturalized citizen herself in order to be a citizen. That does not appear to have ever happened. Yet without it, she could not have been 9 years a citizen of the United States before her election to the U.S. Senate. I have no doubt this significant challenge to Harris's constitutional eligibility to the second highest office in the land will be dismissed out of hand as so much antiquated constitutional tripe. But the concerns about divided allegiance that led our nation's founders to include the natural-born citizen requirement for the office of president and commander-in-chief remain important. Indeed, with persistent threats from Russia, China, and others to our sovereignty and electoral process, those concerns are perhaps even more important today. It would be an inauspicious start for any campaign for the highest offices in the land to ignore the Constitution's eligibility requirements. How else could we possibly expect the candidates, if elected, to honor their oaths to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and, to the best of their ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution? And it's funny, isn't it, how we have this parallel to Barack Obama's running for president and the whole quote-unquote birther thing that was stoked by none other than Donald Trump, now replaying. We are having a rerun of that citizenship question and the constitutional eligibility of this person to hold the office that she ostensibly holds right now, but in reality, of course, does not. Her parents were foreign citizens, but her mother gave birth to Kamala in the United States. And due to the perception of automatic citizenship, Kamala is now a citizen of the United States and therefore eligible to serve as president, despite not actually meeting any of those qualifications. And that's only according to the 14th Amendment. I cannot imagine the founders would have ever dreamed that the child of foreigners could be the American president. In fact, that was the sort of thing that they were explicitly against at all times. And perhaps we will get to that point, but only if they need it. They wouldn't want to upset people about Barack Obama. It's just good to have something like this in the back pocket if they need to leverage Kamala a little bit more. Now, all of this political intrigue has been a distraction from some other stories over the past week that would seem to have some pretty important significance, like the CrowdStrike and Microsoft problem that caused all sorts of computer systems to fail over the past few days and has created enormous problems in the airline industry. Trump meeting with Zelensky for peace talks, Israel apparently bombing Yemen. And among all that stuff, this one kind of slipped through the cracks, but I think it actually might come into play in a major way over the course of the next 100 days or so. This is the New York Times from yesterday. Judge rejects bid to dismiss Trump libel suit against the Pulitzer board. A state judge in Florida has given former President Donald J. Trump a legal victory, refusing to toss a libel lawsuit filed by Mr. Trump over a statement made by the board of the Pulitzer Prizes on coverage of the 2016 campaign's connections to Russia. The ruling on Saturday by Robert Pegg, a senior judge on a circuit court in Florida, means that Mr. Trump's case will proceed, opening the door to a discovery phase that may allow Mr. Trump's lawyers to question Pulitzer officials who issue the most prestigious prizes in journalism. The case hinges on a statement made in 2022 by the panel reaffirming its decision to award the National Reporting Prize in 2018 to the New York Times and the Washington Post for their coverage of Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election and Russian ties to the Trump campaign. After the prize was awarded, a special counsel, Robert Mueller, investigating the Russian interference allegations, said he could find no evidence that Mr. Trump or his aides had coordinated with the interference effort. Mr. Trump and others who disputed the reporting had urged the Pulitzer board to revoke the award, but in its 2022 statement, they said 2 independent reviews had found nothing to discredit the articles. The reviews found that, quote, no passages or headlines, contentions or assertions in any of the winning submissions were discredited by facts that emerged subsequent to the conferral of the prizes, And that statement was released in July of 2022, almost 2 years to the day. Mr. Trump sued the board in state court in Florida over the statement, arguing it was defamatory. Lawyers for the Pulitzer Board argued the panel's statement was an opinion, not a statement of fact, and thus could not be defamatory. In his ruling, Mr. Pegg turned down the board's arguments, citing legal precedent that a statement may be defamatory if a speaker provides inadequate factual context. Mr. Pegg said the board's 2022 statement provided too little information for people who read it to evaluate whether the prize should stand and whether the underlying reporting held up in retrospect. Trump addressed this court decision on Saturday in a post from Truth Social, writing, "Breaking news. Just heard that today during our amazing rally in the great state of Michigan, esteemed Florida Circuit Court Judge Robert Pegg issued a powerful decision totally and completely denying the Pulitzer Prize Board's desperate attempt to dismiss my ironclad defamation lawsuit against them for awarding the once respected Pulitzer Prizes to fake news stories about the Russia hoax by the failing New York Times and the Washington Compost. The judge specifically stated that the fake stories and the prizes awarded them have been debunked by several government investigations. He did not allow Pulitzer to hide behind the deeply outdated Times v. Sullivan case, which is from a bygone era, before media went radical and woke as they suffer from a terminal case of Trump derangement syndrome. The Russia hoax, Ukraine, impeachment number 1, impeachment number 2, crooked Joe Biden's civil and criminal election interference witch hunts against his political opponent, and all other attacks on me and our great MAGA movement are falling apart like a rotten house of cards, proud to be an American. Now, Trump is talking about how Times v. Sullivan is from a bygone era. It sounds like this might blow up the Times v. Sullivan decision, which has long been used to protect these media outlets from claims of defamation. The decision provided for the actual malice standard and moved the burden of proof onto the plaintiff. So Donald Trump in this case would have to prove that there was actual malice involved to prove the defamation, that the result of the defamation was intentional, and that the statements were a product of ill will for the plaintiff. The media, when defaming public officials, could simply rely on errors or opinion or the fact that they didn't intend to cause harm as their protection. Now, I'm not convinced that there should be any of these standards. I believe people should just be allowed to say whatever they want, and that you actually shouldn't be able to sue people for the things that they say. This seems to me to be just another level of control. And people might make practical arguments about allowing for all of these harmful and destructive things to be said, but that's just part of the price of living in a free society. People can say mean things about you. It's not nice to be the target of mean things said. And depending on who's saying those things, they can do great harm to a person's reputation or their ability to conduct business. I have been personally affected by that myself, and many of you probably have as well, because the social media companies, the tech companies, on behalf of the regime, on behalf of many of these media organizations, told your friends and your family and your business associates that you were a liar every time it labeled one of your posts on social media as mis or dis or malinformation. They've done it every time they've labeled you as an extremist or a domestic terrorist or a white nationalist or a Christian nationalist. They just keep going on and on and on. All of that is defamatory. All of it affects people's reputations. All of it affects people's ability to conduct business. And if any of these laws around libel or defamation or any of it are to remain, then people deserve justice across the board for all of that. But I want all that behavior to be punished because it is censorious and violates our First Amendment, not because they said bad things about us and made us look bad and therefore we want to punish their speech. I don't want to punish their speech. I want their speech to be exposed as dishonest and malicious, and I want people to stop relying on information from authority. The reputation of these outlets should be torn down based on what these outlets actually do. But putting that issue aside, the underlying story here is about the coverage of Russiagate, the Russia hoax, and all the false claims made about Donald Trump made to influence the 2016 election and then subvert the presidency of Donald Trump in his first term as the duly elected president. That was part of a very real coup. It was done on behalf of that same global regime, and it actually did harm the country. Who was responsible for all of that? Well, it was Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. And those were the three families that Nicole Wallace of MSNBC just suggested a couple of weeks ago might end up being the targets of mass arrests once Donald Trump comes back. I wonder what might happen when the rest of the country knows that they were lied to about Donald Trump and Russia and that all of that was false. I wonder if this particular case might be a way to show that to everyone. A narrative reenactment of a series of events from the relatively recent past from which people drew all of the wrong meanings. All of that must be reversed. And when it is reversed, the public's view of Joe Biden, of Barack Obama, and of Hillary Clinton will be destroyed because there was a coup against this country and they were involved from the very beginning. And they did not tell the American people the truth about any of this, despite knowing it at the time and ever since. And that will matter because it looks like we are going to get the elimination style tournament. We are going to get the Blitz primary as written by Rosa Brooks of the Transition Integrity Project, published in Semaphore just a few weeks ago. We covered that process and we covered Rosa Brooks's actual memo that described how Hollywood producer Jeffrey Katzenberg would be tasked with producing a television show designed to last for 5 weeks leading up to the convention. In the memo, Brooks wrote, "An exceptional team led by Jeff Katzenberg springs into action to produce 5 weeks of riveting content leading up to the convention. They strike the perfect balance between the election's gravity and a mesmerizing process captivating the nation. Front and center are weekly forums with these dynamic leaders. But instead of trotting out the same old TV talking heads, the forums are moderated by cultural icons. For example, Oprah, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Michelle Obama, Taylor Swift, Tim McGraw, Steph Curry, Charlemagne the God, and Stephen Colbert. Forums are substantive and damn interesting. Audiences are inspired as they learn about each candidate's personal history and vision for America. Excerpts go viral on social media. Viewing audiences are massive, including the disengaged millions with no interest in a Biden-Trump rematch. And so they intend to display a reality show contest where the so-called winner will be the person the media is able to push to some level of acceptance within the court of public opinion. I think it may well be crazy to assume this would end up being anyone other than Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama, who we are told is just going to be one of the celebrity presenters. No one will ever even think of her as a contestant. And you will know that this is what's happening when the media says Michelle Obama's inspiring performance leads to calls for Michelle to enter the process herself. Apparently, they believe this will be their best chance. It won't be real. It's all going to be scripted and staged. The outcome is already determined. Any conflict will simply be one aspect of the fakery. The standard issue villagers across the country will watch in rapt attention, figuring out who their favorite is, just hoping to see Big Mike fly off a turnbuckle with a clothesline, taking out J.B. Pritzker of Illinois in the first round because no one ever wanted to see J.B. Pritzker in tights. And everybody in the uniparty media, the controlled opposition on both sides, will pretend that all of it is 100% real. They've ignored the quote-unquote voters. They've ignored their party's bylaws. They've ignored election laws, and they will ignore the Constitution. It is all fake, and they will ultimately rig and steal the election to the extent they think there's any chance the public might believe it. But still, all of the controlled opposition media figures on the so-called right, all the people who just couldn't stop praising J.D. Vance last week, the people who supported Ron online and on television, all of the people who were in the legacy mainstream media, but now we pretend aren't mainstream media figures anymore because they're quote unquote independent. All of that, itself a product of kayfabe, will pretend that the Blitz primary process, as outlined by Rosa Brooks of the Transition Integrity Project, will be real, and it will select a real Democrat candidate to go on a real ballot to be voted on in a real election. They will whine and complain about how it's not fair or it's not done according to the rules or according to the laws. But they'll eventually agree that it's still what happened. And those nasty Democrats, they're just pushing it through, despite the fact that they're not allowed to. They're just going ahead and doing it anyway. But it's real, and we need to win this real election. So we should stop talking about how fake it is and focus on voting as hard as we can for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. I mean, J.D., he's there to lock down the support of white working class voters in those swing states. And if we lose them, then we might lose the whole election. And if we lose the whole election, then we're going to lose the whole country. And sure, all of it is fake, but if we don't participate in it, then it will become real because our only choice is to grovel. Last week, we were told that we should be happy about the fact that our ruler in 2028 has already been selected for us without our input at all. And now the other side of the Uniparty is going to tell its supporters that they need to vote for whoever their candidate is. Whoever their candidate is will be the best possible person to defeat Donald Trump. In fact, that person is going to wow the entire nation with just how great he or she or she, I guess if it's Big Mike, is. And we will call all of that democracy. Everyone will realize the inversion, but because they don't want to call it fake, because they don't want to seem like they aren't taking this very important process very, very seriously, they'll just go along with it. And they'll do everything they can to make it real. They'll even do it while pointing out the kayfabe, because you can't question the legitimacy of the entire system just because every single part of the system is illegitimate. Understanding this and then refusing to comply with all the fakery, that might be the only way out. But we can't go down that route, not at the expense of our institutions. And so what will it be? Are we going to play political fantasy sports for the next month and then follow that with another 2.5 months of pretending we can win a rigged election in a 50-50 country, as if determining the right amount of fakery to participate in is somehow the only way out of the fakery? That's not the way out. That should be obvious. Calling out the fakery is the way out, so that people will actually begin to look at what's real in these situations. For 3.5 years, people have avoided the topic of Joe Biden's illegitimacy, and they've just gone along with the whole thing as though it's real, making themselves the children watching professional wrestling, making themselves the children who still believe in Santa Claus, or the parents who pretend not to have realized that Santa Claus was actually them. The illegitimacy should be hung around their necks. That should be the anchor. And though it wasn't used for Joe Biden, it should be used for Kamala Harris, and then it should be used for whoever replaces Kamala Harris. And it should be especially easy on Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris is actually an anchor baby. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's hell!